The Discourse starts right now with Cheryl Oates and Erica Barudis.
Welcome back to The Discourse. We took 1 week off so Erica could take her much delayed honeymoon, and wow, do we have some catching up to do.
We do. Well, I can only speak for myself, saying I'm refreshed and ready to tackle anything. Now, that might be a little bit different for all of my friends that are elected officials with the UCP, especially after going back into their ridings, with last week being a constituency week and hearing what Albertans think of that budget.
And historically, this is supposed to be the selling week, right? You go into your constituencies, you take a week off, you go sell the budget. As has been the case for most of this year so far, a lot of distractions, including one in particular, Scott Sinclair, an MLA for Lesser Slave Lake, who is now an independent after a caucus meeting. His peers decided to vote him out of caucus when he said and posted on Facebook that he would not support the UCP budget.
Yeah, and honestly, I was reading this and you're right. One thing is, it was a tough budget. I don't like it. Many things I didn't like that we talked about on last week's episode. But it was a hard thing to probably go back into your constituency talking about. And you're supposed to be, like you said, talking about all the good news and really selling it and getting feedback, which, again, this government can't avoid having distractions. Now, this is a big one. I thought it was really sad to see him sitting in the House so far, basically
on the NDP
outside.
side?
Yeah, on the NDP side, but right by the Sergeant at Arms, the doors, kind of just all by himself, where lots of times they've put, independents up closer to the speaker, but they put him on his own little island. So that was kind of sad to see. But at the same time,
a message.
Yes, it was very much a message. And maybe I shouldn't say sad to see, because although in his post, it was quite lengthy. It kind of started off this budget is disappointing. And then it's a long ramble about, him as an elected official. I didn't disagree with a lot of his sentiment. I think the difference for me is that, I'm not an MLA. I'm not an elected official by Albertans. I, am obviously tied to this party, but not in the same sense that if I'm pissed off about a budget, I can come on here and rant about it. But, the bottom part of his post literally says, this budget is indefensible for the Lesser Slave Lake constituency, and I will not support or vote for it as is, without significant changes. I'll have more to say in the coming days. That's huge. They have a majority, so they really, in theory, shouldn't have to make changes to their budget in order for it to pass.
Yeah,
he's kind of saying that.
It's an interesting thing. And I think from the outside, especially if you're one of his constituents, it looks like, he did the right thing. If you look at the budget, especially the healthcare numbers, especially healthcare support funding, his area, his constituency, the North, gets screwed over in this budget more than any other region. And so, yeah, it's really tough as an MLA when you feel like you have a responsibility to your constituents and you have a responsibility to support their concerns and then a responsibility from caucus to go back and sell this budget to your constituents. That is a really, really tough thing for him to do in this scenario. But my question is, how did we get here?
Yeah. There was in between this, there was also a caucus meeting. So he posted on Facebook, obviously, probably feeling the wrath of his constituents, not happy. Totally fair. What he highlighted for Northern Alberta, for his constituents, for being a conservative, having to swallow a $5.2 billion deficit. I get it. I totally relate to that. I can understand that. But I think then to say you're not going to vote for it is very significant. You and I know that there's caucus unity. How did we get here? I did see him on Ryan Jesperson talk about how he wanted to strike a conversation. And I'm like, dude, caucus 101, shut the fuck up about that in public. Say you want to talk to your, on behalf of Lesser Slave Lake, I want to have a robust caucus conversation to try and reduce this deficit in order to be confident in this, right? He talks about the year-over-year deficit, in which we talked about on our budget special. I think that there was very different ways. It's almost like, did anyone coach you into how to be what the role of an MLA is and what the role of caucus is? And again, maybe that could be pointed at a few UCP caucus members right now. But yeah, how did we get here? I saw it escalate quite quickly. And I was watching it from a beach. So maybe my version of quickly was a little bit different, but my group chats were blowing up. I don't know about yours.
Less so, and probably a little bit of a different take. But certainly I did get a few messages on it. And I think the question is yes, people watch him and say good for you, standing up for your constituents, doing the right thing, making sure that you're pressuring your own party to hold them accountable for, what he feels he's promised his constituents. But anyone who works inside politics knows that you cannot be a member of a caucus and vote against your government's budget. You just can't. This is a confidence issue.
Yeah.
If the budget fails, the government falls. And like, yes, the UCP has a majority, but when it really comes down to it, it's not a huge majority. They won with 49, which is 5 seats beyond a majority.
You lose the
One
speaker.
person is a speaker.
Yeah.
A couple people are sick on any given day. It gets pretty tight. And like, I don't think that the UCP is in jeopardy of losing their budget vote, but do they want a tight budget vote? Like, do they want to have to whip the vote for their own budget? No, definitely not. And I think they had to come out fast and strong to tell everybody else in the caucus, this is a non-starter. You don't get to vote non-confidence against your own government.
Yeah. Well, and you've been on like the opposition side before you were in government. You dealt with caucus management. I mean, I remember when Deborah Drever, I think was her name, you guys had to remove an MLA, bring her back. That happened under Kenny as well. Like, having someone removed and come back is not a big issue. None of those people were saying that they didn't have confidence in a budget. And so that's just huge. Like, and again, I just don't think that maybe he was well briefed on like, what is the severity of this? And so, yeah, there's not a lot of, I guess, like maybe what he was hoping for. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt, which was like wiggle room to actually discuss the budget. Maybe he thought wishful thinking that caucus's role versus government's role in this, that government presents the budget, caucus supports it. And maybe like there's, again, if I was briefing him, I'd say, listen, you can be pissed off about it. You can say, I'm going to stand up and, continue to work with all these ministers to make sure that the people of Lesser Slave Lake get what is in their best interest and champion that. And I'm going to stand strong on like how we can find efficiencies to reduce this budget or reduce this deficit and pay off debt, etc. I will be sharing those with my caucus members, but to say you're not going to vote is just almost like trigger happy. And no shit, buddy, you got thrown out. That's like, what else was the government supposed to do? Now, caucus management, I don't know what happened between then and there. If I was the whip, I also would have been like, go to the bathroom during the vote. If you have to say and not vote for it, I mean, that's still a news story, like you said, not voting for it. But not voting for it versus saying you're voting against it is also, in the world of politics, a big deal.
And I feel like it could have been, I mean, I don't think this is all the fault of the MLA. I think this is a part of the UCP and the caucus and Danielle Smith as well. You have an MLA that can actually articulate very good points about why this budget is not good for his constituency. Why is the government who holds that seat introducing a budget that does not support that constituency? Yeah. And so, they did have an option. They could have pulled him aside and said, like, listen, your concerns are valid. We are going to work with you on this. Support the budget because that's your gig. And we're going to work with you on this. Clearly, that wasn't done. And I think this is sort of like the UCP's MO, like broadly, is you don't like it, you're going to stand up to us. We will just kick you to the curb as fast as we can rather than try to fix the problem and work with you. And like, I do feel it could have been a much better story for them and a much better story for him had there just been like a second to say, can we find mutual agreement somewhere where you don't have to vote against this, you don't have to get kicked out.
And I totally agree. Like I said, the first thing that came up to me in a lot of group chats and the group of my friends, we all worked in the whip's office at one point in like the last 2-3 decades. So caucus management and the role of the whip was a big discussion. Where was that pre-briefing, which I understand it always happens by the minister. To what extent? Was there tough conversations with specific MLAs that had big asks that weren't getting them? Like, was there a little bit maybe more transparency in this budget than you typically see? I would have hoped so, because it is a huge pill for everyone that is actually conservative to swallow. And so I do think, like you said, maybe there was conversations and he's like, no fucking way. Like, we don't know what like the premier's office or the whip or anyone had said. From what we see, I mean, that natural timeline of him ultimately getting kicked out, would have loved to hear what caucus had to say, because I'm surprised that at the end of that caucus discussion, it wasn't like, dude, like this is a team sport. Like, we get you're frustrated. I'm sure ministers could have probably listed off things that they would have liked for their constituency and had that, you're not the only one in a tight spot here, especially for rural MLAs. And so I don't want to say I think it could have been handled better, because I don't know what the whip did. I don't know what premier's office did, but you could also
doesn't
argue
matter
doesn't matter, right? Yeah. And that's exactly, I agree. It's like, it just went from, he went to caucus where weeks ago, unfortunately, Pete Guthrie also went through a conversation with caucus, and the outcome is very, very different. The situation is also very different, too. But the outcome was Pete Guthrie is still a member of caucus and Scott Sinclair is sitting off any type of camera.
Yeah. I mean, they're not comparable. Guthrie wasn't saying he was going to vote non-confidence against his government. He was just saying potentially his government is corrupt and he doesn't think they're doing enough to uncover it.
A little issue.
So just a little bit of a difference. I will say I'm surprised that his colleagues didn't also vote to kick him out. But obviously there's some agreed path forward there. And we haven't heard a lot from Pete Guthrie. So maybe that is the agreed path.
Yeah. And you know what? I mean, Pete's been in the game a lot longer than Scott Sinclair. So I think he kind of understands. He knows what being government is. He knows what being opposition is. Like he's got, or not opposition, but he's got a little bit more of a sense of what this team sport really looks like. I did think it was interesting. Shannon Phillips posted, and it does actually, I think, really summarize well the contrast between Pete Guthrie and Scott Sinclair's situation. And she basically said, like, he said he was going to vote against the government. And she's referring, obviously, to Scott Sinclair on a matter of confidence. And that's a firing offense. Guthrie didn't do that. Sure, there may be more to do to it, but a parliamentary system rests on the principles of responsible government, the main pillar of which is confidence. And I think that like that's a lesson to anyone that maybe doesn't follow it. I mean, we see it federally and people don't really maybe get it because there is this coalition that's holding the Liberals in power. But there has been discussions about loss of confidence in the federal government for months. And so I think she did actually make a really good point when she was tweeting about this and like the severity of like, there's a line, there's bitching and moaning, there's stepping down from a ministerial post, not from the UCP caucus to say that you have concerns versus I'm not going to vote for this budget. And I think he could have said, I have concerns 20 million different ways than saying I'm not going to vote for this budget and in quotations as is.
Yeah. He could have said, I'm going to keep pushing. This isn't good enough for our constituency. The next budget I hope will be better.
Yeah, totally. There's like you said, 30 different things that he could have said short, long term that would have saved his own ass.
The other layer, I think, in this is that Scott Sinclair was the only Indigenous MLA in the UCP caucus. And now the only Indigenous MLA in the UCP caucus has spoken up and said, this doesn't represent my community and this doesn't represent my constituencies and it's not good enough. And they kicked him out. And they now have no Indigenous representation in their caucus. And I think that is also a really bad look for the UCP.
I think it's a bad look because I hate that you're like, this is the poster child for this, where we do have a Minister of Indigenous Relations. We do have lots of members that have nations or relations with their First Nations and their Indigenous peoples.
So the same, though.
But at the same time, like, do you not kick him out because he's Indigenous? To me, that's like too woke for me to even tolerate.
Like,
I'm not
saying that, the rules don't apply to someone because of their race. I'm saying that, with all of these decisions come risks. And one of the risks the UCP was fine with taking is that they do not have Indigenous representation around their table anymore.
Yep. And they'll have to leverage connections that people have. I think they've had to do that. I don't try to think who had Indigenous relations in under the Kenney government. I mean, I think of Pearl Callahason, who actually also comes from Lesser Slave Lake, and she was there for 20 years under the PCs. They haven't had a lot of representation, so I don't know if they see that maybe the same way you do. But either way, like this was one of my, and I hate that he did this because he is one of my favorite MLAs. He was, I think, on a short list to being in cabinet. And, I think, like you said, can well articulate things. He's a strong advocate for either his communities or his riding. And so I also think that it's shitty for his future within becoming a minister. He kind of shot himself in the foot, I think, on, he sure as shit ain't getting it in the next round.
Well, it's a funny thing to say. I just thought when I said I wasn't going to vote for the budget that it would open a conversation.
Yeah. Well, this is what
that's
I mean.
a funny thing
who
to say.
Who advised you? Like, who told you that this was like not a, throwing a bomb into something, right? Like that, and it's probably not the right expression, but like, not really, really putting everything on the line. Like that is a very harsh thing to say. And I wonder if in hindsight, he looks back and was like, maybe I should have like finessed that a little bit, saying that I was really pissed off as opposed to, well, I'm not voting for this.
Hard lesson learned. And I mean, part of exactly why there's probably no question when his peers voted to kick him out. Like, this is the question. Do we even give someone who chooses to vote non-confidence against their government, do we even give them a second to think about whether it was the right or the wrong choice?
Yeah. Yeah. And we've seen that happen.
They sent a really clear message.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I don't think anyone should be surprised. It might be unfortunate because, like I said, great guy, had a great career in front of him. And now he's alone and has to navigate that. So, yeah, What's next? I guess we'll just keep seeing. I'm waiting to see when Pete Guthrie gets out of the penalty box and what that looks like. But I don't know if there's a path back for Scott.
I'm sure there is.
I was going to say, I will say that the premier has been very open and welcoming to individuals that wanted a path back. Todd Lowen being a big example.
Said some crazy stuff.
Not Drew Barnes. Hey, Todd Lowen ran for party leader. I think that's a good enough symbol that you're going to be loyal to the brand. Anyways, moving on. I don't even.
Let's not talk about all those people who got kicked out of the caucus for their extremist views. Let's just move right past that.
Okay, well, I'm now moving into something else I don't want to talk about. I could have talked about the Scott Sinclair technicalities of caucus forever. However, we still actually also have to talk about something that I'm so glad we didn't kick off this episode with. There was something bigger, more relevant in the news right now, but is our ongoing lengthy discussion about the AHS scandal.
Erica, we agreed not to call it the AHS scandal. I think what you're talking about is corrupt care.
Okay. I think we agreed. You don't love that one.
I tried others. Nothing stuck.
Okay, the NDP is yes, our alliteration. Let's just call it the allegations. I don't know what else is high enough level to be we're not pointing fingers. We're just letting it happen.
The UCP scandal.
Okay, well, I'm going to call it the allegations. You call it whatever you would like to. But there's been a lot happening since our last episode. And I think the biggest thing and the biggest takeaway is that the RCMP is now investigating.
Yeah, I think this was kind of inevitable once you saw the statement of claim that Athana Menthelopoulos filed in court. There's too much there for the RCMP not to take this forward. I think there was always enough allegations that it could potentially be criminal. And like we talked about before, there's no process for this. If the RCMP has enough complaints and the RCMP thinks there's enough grounds and enough evidence to investigate, they can do that anytime. And so they've taken some time to really look closely at this case. Now they're going to investigate it. I really, really, really hope that this goes faster and more transparently than the investigation into the UCP leadership, because that was painful.
That was very long. I think it was I remember the day that it was all cleared and it was well, Jason Kenney is no longer here. We have a new leader. And like you said, it was a very long, drawn out process. And that was a leadership. So I think some of the access to maybe information or, and there was
tougher.
And so I think I agree. Timely and full of due diligence is what I'm looking for. I don't disagree. I think it was possibly inevitable as everything is coming out. I am interested in now what is the relevance to both the public and to just the process for the internal review that's happening within AHS to this independent investigation that the government announced. Does anyone care about that anymore? Or will it all now just be fall to the RCMP? I don't disagree that the government still should have gone forward with that, given especially you're not just we'll just wait to see if the RCMP is going to come out. I still think they took the right moves, maybe not as quickly or promptly as I would have liked or you. But what do you think happens with that? Or what is is the public just going to be waiting for the RCMP regardless of this? I think it's May 30th that the independent investigation needs to come back.
I mean, there's a couple of pieces here, and some of it, I don't think it even matters that much. It does matter. Obviously, it matters if the RCMP finds someone having charging someone or having committed a criminal offense. Obviously, that is huge, massive, landscape shifting information. But for a second, let's just imagine that these investigations go forward and nothing crazy happens. There were some issues with procurement. This is all, as the government has said, steady as she goes. I think even then, this process and the ongoing media coverage is damaging to the government, because this is actually when you look at the detail, it's a hard thing to saturate the public narrative with. It's a hard thing for people to understand. They know something's going on in health right now, but they don't necessarily understand all the details of it, and they're not necessarily interested in reading all the details about it. But the next steps are going to be the government files their statement of defense. Potentially Marshall Smith files a statement of defense. That is another huge round of stories. Hopefully, it will probably be helpful to the government. And then when the internal review comes out, that's another big story, whatever its findings are. And when the RCMP come out, that's another big story. So this could go one way where there's no findings there, but I still think it's damaging. Yeah. And then on the other side of it,
it's a rolling issue,
exactly.
Right? It's a rolling topic that you don't want to discuss.
If they find anything this is going to blow up and it's going to be really, really tough for the government to recover.
And when you say blow up, like what do you think? Because I know you've said before you don't think that this is going to be like a Premier Smith resignation. I agree with that. I still do. I mean, do you think it could get to that severity, or do you think, I mean, I guess it depends what happens.
Yeah, I mean,
but do you
there's
still
so many
think
variables.
now RCMP, is it bigger now with the consequences?
Well, I mean, if the RCMP charged someone, yes. Yeah. Like maybe you're right. Maybe that doesn't result in Danielle Smith resigning, but that is pretty heavy damage to the UCP brand, the UCP government, and their re-election dreams in 2027. Not to say, necessarily the Premier resigns. She could also be pushed out by her own membership if her membership believes that this lands at her feet, or, the UCP brand is just damaged to a point where they can't be reelected in the next election. Yeah, and I'm not saying like this one charge could do it all, but as we know, this stuff adds up.
And I think, I mean, I always say like honesty and loyalty are like two big currencies within politics. And trust. We've seen it from multiple governments, whether it's national, provincial. You lose the public's trust and it's really, really hard to come back with. I, as of right now, am very confident that is not the outcome of this, or again, that falls to the Premier or the Minister of Health. I don't think that they are, as we say many a times, the villains. But you said, like, you've underlined someone may be charged.
Like in this story, but like in this story, like, I mean, that is kind of the hard part for the public is like, who is the bad guy? Yeah. And I think it's easy for the public to look at private companies and say, well, they're the bad guy. But in this case, we're talking about procurement. And so if the issue is procurement, if the issue is that the government didn't follow procurement guidelines, that's not the fault of a private company. No, I agree. That is the fault of the government, especially if the allegations that there was pressure inside the government to sign contracts that didn't meet procurement standards, that's on the government, whether a private company benefited or not. I completely agree. I think, if a private business benefited, if they figured out, how to position themselves properly, again, the people that signed off or the people that were responsible for that pressure internally are the ones to hold. So yes, I think that's the whole difference between public and private. And like, you're right, this is within age. I do think that the RCMP investigation is the highest level in which obviously we'll see looking at all of those details. And maybe someday, Cheryl, you'll get your answer on the 12%. I still have to make you a shirt for it. I feel like it's not being asked loud enough. Like, how is this not like a foundational question that journalists in the opposition and Albertans are asking? I feel like if we knew who owned the 12%, then we know who's in on the deal. Sometimes I think we're just the ones with the big enough balls to say things, and maybe they're all looking for the 12%, and you're just like, I want to know, This is how I describe myself, Erica. Just always the biggest balls. Back. It's going to be on the back of the shirt. It's going to say 12%. I can't wait to watch you wear that. Okay, but just coming back, so this independent investigation, do you think that will... are people still going to be watching for that? You and I are inside baseball. I think so. All these sequence of events are going to be what you think will... I mean, I remember the RCMP, any update, any story, anything, kept opening up a wound that the sooner for the government that they can get the statement of defense out, we'll see who else decides that it's strategic for them or the government to issue a statement of defense. Because as we've gone over, the only person or people required would be AHS and the Minister of Health, correct? Yeah. Yes, but also we have heard from the Premier that Marshall Smith will also file his own statement of defense. Yes, well, as he's named. Yes, exactly. And then he might not. And then he might decide that that's not in his best interest or in their best interest. But I wouldn't be surprised, to your point, that he would file and maybe anyone else that is mentioned. I'll give the glory to you as your leader did call for this RCMP from day one. I think premature, and nobody likes anything premature. But what do you think? How do you think this is going to play out for the NDP, for Naheed Nenshi? Well, this is a gift. If we're just talking pure politics, this is a gift to the NDP. Mm-hmm. And as we talked about previously, the party, the caucus under his leadership was sort of struggling to find, messaging and a narrative that stuck. Now they have this gift where they don't have to come up with something. There is something that is already salient in the public. And I think they've done a pretty good job of ensuring that every day they're on it. It doesn't matter if they're asking the same questions in question period. Mm-hmm. They don't need to find a new angle. All they need to do is keep pushing and pushing and pushing on what's out there every single day. And I think they're doing a good job of that. Yeah. And
And just for our listeners, obviously once an RCMP investigation is underway, you have to be very, very careful on what you ask and alluding to this in the House, if at all. Typically, I mean, because the answer is going to be it's under an RCMP investigation.
But no one asks questions in question period for the answers.
No, I was just going to say, I'm like, I have to admit, I've been still on vacation till 11 p.m. last night, so I haven't seen what they've been asking, but it does diffuse some of the ongoing questions, especially even in the media, that the government will have to answer because they have a holding line now. And so it will give them, I don't want to say a little bit of an out, but it will deflect. And I don't know, because I've never lived this before, but like what happens when the statement of defense comes out, but there's also an RCMP investigation, and how reporters as well as politicians navigate that as well.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And
I mean, case study for the applied politics course that you're also teaching at.
Yeah. If I'm a reporter, and even as a former reporter, like May 30th is marked on my calendar. Like every journalist who's been following the story, and even those who haven't, are going to be counting down to seeing what an internal investigation comes up with. And truthfully, even if an internal investigation finds no wrongdoing, which, you know, obviously is what the government is looking for, the report is still going to detail all of the allegations once again, which means all of those allegations are out in the public once again. So it could be, you know, a good day for the government in terms of clearing its name, but it's not going to be a net positive no matter what.
No, it's definitely not. And it also becomes, you know, that dice roll of how good was our independent investigation if the RCMP then comes up with something too, right? They're going and getting legal counsel on both sides.
That'll look bad.
It is also, it will look very bad that you're like, we did this. So I think it's uncharted territory from anything I've really lived through with the in-depth sides that are happening with internally, externally, in the public facing. And I don't know. I always wonder too, though. It's like I've watched Pierre Poilievre as Trudeau, like, you know, is going through a lot of this, or was going through a lot. He picked his points to come in. I'm interested to see, and like, just because I think that she's obviously now gone, but Rachel would have handled this, I think, very well going against government. And like, that's shitty for an head to have to like live up to. But I'm very interested to see where he picks his lanes to interject, and or who, right? They've put Ganley up a lot as the former Minister of Justice as that lead, especially in the House, given that Nenshi isn't there. But yeah, it's going to be...
call the by-election already.
Yeah, because you know what? If I was the UCP government right now, I'm like, yeah, let's just go have a by-election. I mean, they only have so much time. I think it will be called, but I have heard that like there might even be a nomination contest. I've heard 2 names kicking tires for that. So not
Brave
sure
souls.
why. I'll just be like, remember the time? I got so many questions when I like jokingly tweeted about this, like running for the Strathcona, and I had like, it was great. I was like, oh, people listen to our podcast and read my tweets.
You can.
I could still.
I love that. Like a couple months ago before the Christmas break, you were like, come on, someone needs to give up their seat. Nenshi needs a seat in the House. This is ridiculous. The leader needs to be in the House. And
I wanted him to
cool your
to
jets, Cheryl. We have a lot on our plate.
I mean, I think it's inevitable, so just fucking call the thing. But man, I'm spicy with my language today. I guess I was like in vacation mode, and I just like dropping all the F-bombs. But
now the world knows how you actually talk.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, like I don't. It's inevitable to me. It is a stronghold. I look forward to him spending so much time in Edmonton, getting to know his constituents. Just I don't see that. I don't see the loss besides just like the management of and participation in a by-election. But you know, the party's like sold out all their leaders' dinners. So you know, they're not really hustling for tickets. Maybe they can hustle for some votes. Are you going? Are you going to any of them?
To which?
The UCP leaders' dinners across the province.
Oh, I am not.
Maybe I'll invite you to sit with me.
Thanks.
Speaking of elections,
I would actually I think I would enjoy it. It's interesting soaking in another party's like political dynamics.
You know what? I will admit, I believe that I will, because of the name dropping, the Acme applied politics as I'm sitting in my office. But like that I am going to be, you know, talking to NDP caucuses across the country, maybe even going to a conference or two. Very excited to see how the other world, just even the sponsorship, it's very different.
It's interesting.
Yeah,
and people talk different, and their dynamics are different.
Yeah, you call it the Progress Summit.
Yeah, I mean, for that reason alone, I would go to a Conservative event.
Interesting, Cheryl.
Not that I haven't been to many Conservative events around Alberta.
It's true.
Unofficial Conservative events.
Yes, but We might make this official and we'll maybe do a live podcast from there.
Oh, great.
Amazing. But speaking of elections, we got one more subject to cover, and I'm sure everyone's been paying attention to this one too.
Yes, amidst all the excitement going on at home, Canada has a new Prime Minister designate. Mark Carney won in a crazy landslide majority victory in Sunday's Liberal leadership with about 86% support. And I think many people expected him to win, but I'm not sure that anyone was anticipating 86%. So a new chapter for the Liberals in Canada and a lot more drama coming over the next few weeks.
Yes. Well, the coronation, for those that don't know what we're talking about, the coronation of Trudeau 2.0 is now officially closed. But now I think the interesting thing is, when is this election going to be called? What conversations happened behind closed doors between your bro Jagmeet and Mr. Carney in advance of this? And when can Canadians expect that someone's going to come and knocking on their door asking for their support? So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is all going to happen really fast. So, there's obviously some housekeeping for the Prime Minister designate to do to make sure he's no longer the Prime Minister designate, and, a cabinet and some security clearances. But we're going to be voting before the end of April.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm not upset about that. Although I will say I was far more excited about the results of an election, not for the caucus management that would come for the CPC with that many individuals, but a lot of polls are showing that it's a lot closer under Mark Carney than under Justin Trudeau. I think that's a bit of a honeymoon phase and just excitement of this man that just crushed it, even though he is Justin Trudeau, and people will soon find that out. But yeah, I still am pretty content that the next Prime Minister after this designate is Pierre Poilievre.
I'm going to disagree with you. I think that the polls are accurate at this point. I don't think it's a honeymoon. I think that people indeed did want change from Justin Trudeau, and they don't necessarily want Pierre Poilievre. And so Mark Carney is a guy who doesn't just talk about the economy, has lived and breathed and managed the economy for a really long time. And we're not in an era where you can solve the problems that Canada is facing because you came up with a good rhyme. Mark Carney has actually managed crises. And so I think a lot of Canadians are looking at that and saying, do I want the guy who has been the governor of the Bank of Canada to deal with this trade war with the US? Or do I want the guy who petulantly eats apples into a microphone? And for me,
I like
one
that
is a
guy,
much
though.
better choice.
Lots of pickup. So what you're saying is, just because you create something, I don't know, like corrupt care, that you are qualified in any way, shape, or form to be government. Awesome. I heard that from Cheryl Oates here, ladies and gentlemen. First, your face, dead pan to me on that one.
Because it's not a comparable. Pierre Poilievre has run around for 2 years just yelling axe the tax with no policy to follow up with it.
He does have quite a bit. And again, I know you didn't listen to Jordan
Pretty
Peterson.
recently.
He does go into a lot more detail on some of the policies he'll put in place.
Yeah, and on the eve of the election, that makes sense.
They're both going to have to put proof in the pudding, right? I thought it was interesting how heavy Mark Carney and Doug Ford are buddying up, when Doug Ford has been very anti-Western Canada as of recent. The other thing I found interesting, and I know 86%, I can't discredit that it's a very strong mandate from the members. I went in and looked poll by poll. Yes, everyone. When looking at sloths, I also look at poll by poll breakdown.
You sound so fun to be on vacation with.
Yeah, Ryan's this is the best. But he did win a lot of Eastern Canada, Quebec, Ontario. So I think it's going to be interesting how he can get the rest of Canada on side, especially, again, buddying up with Ford, who is not winning any friends over with the premiers, as I've seen in Western Canada right now. So that should be interesting. I do want to just ask, so you're confident. I'm pretty close. It's Jagmeet's just he's not going to let this happen. I mean, I think that it's his legacy that then is on the line if he's
not going to let what happen?
The election. He's not going to have a coalition or any agreement. He's going to make the red drop. I think he has to.
I mean,
right?
I think the government's going to call the election. I mean, this is their moment. The polls have collided. Let's not give, if you're the Liberals, let's not give any moment for the Conservatives to define Mark Carney. Go straight to the polls. This is the best shot they've had in years. It's not Jagmeet plays no part in this.
Oh, he doesn't. He's down 2% now. I mean, he was on his high in June. I think he missed the opportunity for himself and his party. I get they have no money or candidates. I've seen other NDP parties have, very different, very parachute candidates available and still win an election, right? Or at least win some seats. I'm talking about you guys in 2015, just in case you didn't get that. And then
it worked out. We did win a majority.
No, that's what I said. Like, you can still win seats even if you don't.
I mean,
have
that was
the
a bit of an anomaly. I don't think we're going to find ourselves in that position again, where we run candidates thinking they'll never win, and then win a sweeping majority. That's probably like a blip in history.
Yeah. No, and you are right, though, is the longer that the Liberals wait, the more that the Conservatives will paint him as Trudeau 2.0, which I think there is a lot of facts to back. But I think that even if it is not, like you say, a honeymoon phase, he's still going to monopolize on whether it's a honeymoon phase or not. Calling an election within this period has the benefits for the Liberals.
Yeah. And I think, like I said this on a panel earlier this week, I think it was really, really smart for Mark Carney at the first available opportunity, which was his acceptance speech at the Liberal convention, to take the carbon tax off the table and take the capital gains tax off the table, like not even an ounce of daylight for anybody to say that he's going to move forward with the carbon tax. He has said he won't. And I know that the Conservatives will continue to campaign on carbon tax Carney, but it's just not true anymore. And that does take a little bit of credibility away and does force them to find new ground to campaign on. And listen, I was part of a government that fully supported the carbon tax, and I still think it was the best policy at the time. But at a certain point, you have to just admit, politically, it's dead. It is not moving forward. It is not something you can be elected on, and decide to pivot. And I think it was really, really smart and strategic for Mark Carney to do that at the first opportunity.
Yeah. And I think the difference is, did that resonate, and will he continue to say that? Not saying he wouldn't, but like continue to say that every single day so that the average Canadian can differentiate this Liberal Party from the carbon tax that was introduced under Justin Trudeau to Mark Carney. You're right. I think strategically it was very smart for him to cut the legs off of, or take the oxygen out of that. I think the difference is there enough time for the average Canadian to hear that?
And truthfully, having lived through Saskatchewan, it doesn't matter if he says it every day. Carla Beck said every single day that she was not going to bring in a carbon tax. And the Sask party ran ads every single day saying she was going to bring in a carbon tax, saying she supported the carbon tax, saying she was a federal New Democrat. It doesn't matter, because the Conservative ad machine is going to do whatever it wants, no matter what the other candidates say. They have no problem lying.
Okay, I do want to ask you a question, because you guys came in with, kind of an unexpected 2015 government. There was a lot of roles to be filled. Mark Carney appointing a few very interesting people to be his chief of staff, to be kind of leading like former cabinet ministers. What's your take on that? Like, I was a little bit surprised that the former minister of public safety, that he is now the chief of staff, and that there's quite a bit of former elected officials, which isn't really super typical for someone to bring in. How do you break that down?
I just think I know that on the outside, the Liberals are trying to brand themselves as something different than Trudeau has been for the last decade. But I think truthfully on the inside it is. I think Mark Carney is a much different politician than Justin Trudeau was or is. And I think that's reflected in the kind of people and advice and advisors that he's bringing in and putting around him. And the general public is not going to go through the names and be like, oh, that's an interesting appointment. But I think for those people who maybe shape public opinion or are talking about what this means, or for business that are talking about what it means, that is a really strong signal when you appoint certain people who bring in certain advice and you really change the workings of the upper offices. I think practically speaking, it changes the way that the office works, but I think also it's a sign to the public and to business.
Yeah. And so I guess my follow-up to that is just on if you're trying to differentiate yourself from that, you're putting former cabinet ministers in that role. Isn't that kind of doing the exact opposite? How do you...
it's a balance,
I think
right?
It's interesting.
You can't come in at this point in the process as a government when you're negotiating with the United States on the biggest economic threat our country has faced in a generation and blow it all up. So it's for the Liberals, it's a balancing act between change and continuity. Who can you keep in there that actually knows these files, that knows what's going on, and create enough change so you have outside perspectives in, and also a signal to the public that you're not the same as the previous government. So tough to do. If they can do it, kudos to them, but it's a pretty tough balancing act.
Yeah. I mean, I even think back to Premier Smith coming in. Her transition team was very different than what Jason Kenney's transition team looked like. There was a lot of, guess I was like maybe the only one that was around for both of those in the sense of like being connected to the leaders. But I do think a different tone is being set. He's trying to differentiate, I think very similar to what Premier Smith did in having kind of cross sections of the party, of the membership, new and old. And then she had 6 months, right? And this is like 6 days essentially before they call it. So I think it'll be interesting to watch just how he can differentiate to, you know, he's taking some of these moves that we're like, aha, that was strategic, or we understand why he did that. But does that resonate to the voter? I don't think it does. I think, again, that there's some close excitement and just like a relief from a Trudeau hangover. If the Conservatives do their job right, they will continue to tie him to Trudeau. I think that that's their best strategic move, and getting, you know, talking about things that matter and how their policies are better suited for Canadians. Because I think you're right. The closer you get to an election, the harder it is to have alliterations or sound bites. You've got to put proof in the pudding. I mean, Trudeau was going into 21 in a pretty shitty spot and had one policy. I strongly agree that he won because of the $10 a day daycare. So everyone was kind of sick of him, plugged their nose, and now they've got a different leader who I think is the same, but same.
But you would.
And that's exactly, I think, the angle that they need to take. What do you think happens to Freeland? I didn't watch her remarks because I just saw them all get called with like their 3, 3, and 8 or whatever it was.
I mean, by the time this podcast comes out, I'm sure we will know who the cabinet is. But, you know, he could take a page out of Danielle Smith's book and say,
you get a minister, you get a ministry.
Yeah, I hug you close. Thank you for your contributions. I know we've all heard about their long personal history. So, yeah, I would imagine she's a strong leader and is obviously a nod to continuity. I think he'd be smart to keep her.
I think he would be smart to keep her, especially because of her strong stance she took to distance herself from Trudeau, not just for her run, but as the Minister of Finance, that I think it would send a big signal that Trudeau was very criticized of, is like, I love and support women. And then they're the first that he kind of gets rid of or uses as leverage. And that she was, you know, he found threatening women and disposed of them, Trudeau did. And if Carney doesn't do that, I think it actually does put into practice what he's preaching, that he is not Trudeau. Now, I hope he doesn't do any of those things strategically for my party, but I think they've got a good handle on how to run this election.
And it would be a little bit weird, given all the very kind things he said to his fellow contestants at the Liberal convention in his speech, thanking them for their contributions and their ideas and their service and their work, to then be like, but actually, like, thanks, stay away from what I'm doing.
Yeah, gives her Ministry of Finance back. Like, is that a backhanded compliment? We will see. So we've got way more to watch in Alberta. We've got all these 20-ish bills or whatever that I don't even really pay attention to because there's so much other material for us to cover. But now we will be back every Thursday because apparently I can only delay my honeymoon 5 years and I don't get to do it in the near future.
Ryan is sick of vacationing with you because all you do is check Liberal leadership results. Yeah, we got everything in this week. We're back to our weekly segments. Erica isn't going away on a trip again for a while. So make sure that you like and subscribe on YouTube and wherever you're getting your podcasts so you don't miss an episode.
And as mentioned, like, Lord knows that this content is going to continue in Alberta and Canada, as we might be heading to the polls sooner rather than later. So make sure to follow us on X, Instagram, and TikTok. See you next week and every week at 5 a.m. on Thursday.
The Discourse is hosted by Cheryl Oates and Erica Barudis. Follow on Instagram at The Discourse Pod. Subscribe to The Discourse on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.